The morning Ilara Voss turned 23, nobody in her family remembered. She did not say anything about it. She had learned, over the 7 years she had spent at Fernholt, that pointing out what her family forgot was the fastest way to make them feel guilty, and the second fastest way to make them angry. Neither outcome was worth a birthday cake. So she rose at the same hour she always did, put on the same gray dress she wore on Tuesdays, and walked down to the East Garden before anyone else was awake. The East Garden was hers. Not officially. Nothing at Fernholt belonged to Ilara officially. But it was hers, the way habits become yours after long enough. The worn stone bench by the iron fence, the climbing roses she had trained up the left wall over 4 patient years, the patch of lavender she had planted herself from seeds her mother had once bought and then forgotten about. The garden knew her. It did not ask her to explain herself. She sat on the bench with a book open across her knees. The book was a 3-volume history of Roman aqueducts, and she was deep into the 2nd volume. She was not particularly interested in Roman aqueducts. She had simply run out of unread books in the Fernholt library, and the history of aqueducts was at least written by someone who had clearly cared very much about what they were saying. The birds were loud that morning. The light came in low and gold over the east wall, the kind of light that makes everything look like something worth painting. Ilara read 2 pages. Then she set the book face down beside her and looked at the roses, which were blooming early and too enthusiastically, the way roses do when they have more sun than they need. She was not unhappy. That was the thing she had taken the longest to understand about her situation. She had expected, when she was 16, and the plan became clear to her, to spend her life at Fernholt being miserable. She had braced for misery the way you brace for cold water. But misery, as it turned out, was not what her family had given her. What they had given her was something harder to name and harder to argue with. A very quiet life, very full of empty hours, in a place that was genuinely beautiful if you were willing to look at it for what it was. She was willing. She had become very good at looking at things for what they were. She had also become very good at not examining the difference between not being unhappy and actually being happy. She kept these 2 things in separate drawers of her mind and did not open both at once. It was a practical arrangement. She did not recommend it for everyone, but it had served her adequately for 7 years. The garden helped. It had always helped. There was something about the East Garden that operated like a form of permission. Permission to be present in a way that the house did not offer, where the rooms all had their designated functions, and her presence in them was always slightly auxiliary. In the garden she was not auxiliary. She was the one who had planted the lavender and trained the roses and built the compost corner near the south gate, and decided that the stone bench needed a better position and moved it herself, with the help of the old gardener Hobbs, on a Tuesday in October 3 years ago. The garden was hers in the deep way of things you have changed by being in them. She looked at the roses on the left wall. They were very good this year. She had not over-trimmed them in February, which had been a gamble, because February had been wet and the canes looked wrong, and she had almost cut more than she should have, but she had stopped herself and waited. And the result was a wall of roses in late June that was absolutely certain of itself in a way that felt personal. She liked things that were certain of themselves. She had spent 7 years cultivating the same quality. She heard the carriage on the drive at 9:30. Her father was expecting a visitor on Thursday. Today was Tuesday. She registered this without alarm, thinking it was probably a delivery, or the rector making his quarterly call, or some piece of farm business she did not need to involve herself in. She turned her page. She read about the Roman engineers who had calculated the gradient of a water channel across 40 miles of mountain terrain without anything more sophisticated than a measuring rod and a container of still water. She was thinking about this, about the patience it must have required, the stillness of standing on a mountainside and watching the surface of a bowl of water tell you which way the ground was tilting, when she heard footsteps on the garden gravel. She looked up. He came around the east wall, the way people come around corners when they do not know what is on the other side. At a normal pace, not quite looking where they are going. In the middle of a thought. He was tall. That was the first thing she registered. And it was the wrong first thing. But there was simply a great deal of him to register, and height was the most immediate. Dark coat, dark hair, a face that had the sort of structure to it that made you think of architecture before you thought of anything else. Clean lines, deliberate proportion, nothing wasted. He moved, she noticed, without the performative ease that some tall men developed as a habit, the calculated nonchalance of someone who knew they were being watched and had made their peace with it. He moved like someone who had genuinely not thought about how he looked in several years, or had thought about it once, determined it was satisfactory, and then permanently redirected that attention elsewhere. He was not what she had expected when she heard footsteps. He stopped when he saw her, not with surprise exactly, but with the particular stillness of someone recalibrating. She watched him take in the bench, the book, the pruning shears on the gravel beside her feet. His eyes moved the way a person's eyes move when they are assessing rather than admiring. "I beg your pardon," he said. "I was looking for the main house." His voice was what she would later spend too much time thinking about. Not because it was beautiful in any theatrical way, but because it was precise. Every word placed where it was meant to go. A voice that had never needed to fill a room by being loud. "You came through the service gate," Ilara said. "The main house is through the arch at the top of the path." "I see." He looked at the arch. He looked back at her. "You are not a gardener." She did not know why this observation felt so significant. It was an obvious thing to say. She was holding a book about Roman aqueducts, and wearing a gray dress that, while not expensive, was clearly not the dress of a working woman. But something in the way he said it landed differently than she expected. Not a judgment, not a condescension, an observation, simply noting a fact. "No," she said, "I'm not." "You are 2 days early," she added, because she had just placed him, the shape of the thing settling into clarity. The appointment, her father's letter, Thursday. He looked at her with a small shift of expression. "You know who I am." "I know my father is expecting the Duke of Ashmore on Thursday," Ilara said. "I assumed you were him. You carry yourself like someone who expects paths to clear." There was a silence, a very specific kind of silence, the kind that can tip in any direction. He said, "That is either a compliment or an insult." "It is an observation," she said. "I spend a great deal of time out here. I have become very good at them." He looked at her for one more second, not long, but long enough for her to feel the weight of being genuinely looked at by someone who did it with intention. Then he said, "Thank you for the direction," and he turned toward the arch. She went back to her book. She did not read a single word on the next 3 pages. Her mother arrived from the terrace doors at a speed that had the quality of controlled running, which was the specific movement of a woman who had spotted something she needed to intercept before it became a situation. Lady Voss was elegant in the way that English country houses are elegant. Maintained, purposeful, somewhat cold despite being genuinely well-structured. She had Ilara's same dark hair, kept severely arranged. She had a smile she wore in social situations that never quite reached her eyes, not because she was unkind, but because her eyes were always doing something else. They were doing something else now. They were doing the rapid, comprehensive work of calculating how long the Duke had been in the East Garden, and what he might have seen, and whether any of it constituted a problem. Elara watched this calculation happen on her mother's face, and felt, as she often did in these moments, a complicated feeling that was not quite hurt and not quite anger, and lived somewhere between the two, in a place she had learned to leave alone. Elara. Her mother's voice was soft and perfectly composed. I did not realize you were still in the garden. It is 9:30, Elara said. I am always in the garden at 9:30. Yes. A pause that contained a great many things and said none of them. His Grace has arrived. I will see to him. He found his own way to the front door, Elara said. He did not seem distressed. Her mother moved her gaze to the rose wall and then back. Come inside when you are finished. I am finished, Elara said. But I would like to stay out here a little longer. There was another pause. Her mother performed a small, careful smile. Of course, she said, and went back through the terrace doors. Elara sat in the East Garden for another 20 minutes. She did not pick up the book. She sat with her hands loose in her lap and looked at the roses and thought about the fact that her mother had positioned herself between Elara and the Duke as smoothly and automatically as if she had been practicing the movement. And she thought about how long she had been someone who needed to be positioned around. And she thought about the Duke's voice saying, "You are 2 days early," and realizing she had said that, not him, and feeling vaguely pleased with herself for the first time in several weeks. She had not expected him to be interested in her response. Most people who visited Fernholt were not interested in Elara's responses. The ones who encountered her, and it was few, carefully managed, were polite, in the impersonal way of people doing a social duty. They registered her as a daughter of the house, a quiet girl, someone to nod at on their way to speak with Lord Voss. They did not register her as someone who had read 347 books in 7 years, and had opinions about aqueducts. He had registered something. She could not say what, but she had felt it. Inside the house, in Lord Voss's study, a conversation was happening about land parcels and drainage rights, and a property on the southern border of the Ashmore estate that needed clear documentation before a legal matter could be resolved. And it was a straightforward piece of business, the kind that required a half-hour of discussion and a set of papers to sign. Lord Voss conducted it with the smooth professional ease of a man who was used to these meetings, and good at them. The Duke conducted his side of it perfectly correctly. He also spent 11 minutes looking out the study window. Lord Voss's study overlooked the south lawn, not the East Garden. There was nothing to see through the south window, except the ha-ha and the oak tree his grandfather had planted. This did not prevent the Duke from looking in that direction with the particular quality of attention a person gives to something they are actually thinking about, rather than the thing in front of them. His solicitor, Mr. Hartley, who had accompanied him from London and who had known the Duke since the Duke was 17, noticed this. Mr. Hartley said nothing. He was paid to handle documents, not observations. They concluded the meeting at 20 minutes to 11. Lord Voss offered port, which the Duke accepted because it was the appropriate thing to do, and they talked for another 10 minutes about the weather and the state of the roads from London, which had been terrible since the rain in the first week of the month. Lord Voss mentioned, briefly and with careful casualness, that he hoped the Duke had not had too unsettled a journey. The Duke said the journey had been fine. He said he had arrived early because he had finished another piece of business in Dorchester sooner than expected and had decided to come directly. He did not mention the East Garden. Lord Voss did not mention it either. This was because Lord Voss did not know the Duke had found it. If he had known, there would have been a different quality to the conversation. A slight tension, a searching quality in Lord Voss's eyes, as he tried to determine what had been said, and whether it required managing. But the Duke, who was not yet sure what he thought about what he had found in the garden, offered no indication, and Lord Voss was left to assume that the first quarter of an hour of his guest's arrival had passed without incident. They shook hands in the entrance hall. Mr. Hartley gathered the signed papers. On his way to the carriage, the Duke turned left instead of right. He walked back through the arch at the top of the garden path and down the gravel between the lavender beds, and stopped beside the stone bench where Elara Voss was still sitting. She had picked up the book again. She was reading with the focused, slightly withdrawn look of someone who had returned to a page several times without quite landing on it. He stopped 2 feet from the bench. She looked up. He looked at the book's spine for a moment. His expression was unreadable. Then he said, "Roman Aqueducts." "Volume 2, she said. "Is it interesting?" She considered this with genuine thought. "The engineer is interesting," she said. "The aqueducts themselves are mostly just channels. But the people who built them were solving problems nobody had solved before, and they did it without modern tools, and they were right. That is interesting. You enjoy reading about people who were right. I enjoy reading about people who did careful things," she said. "Being right is just what happens afterward." He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of having nothing to say, the silence of someone who has just been given something unexpected and is deciding what to do with it. "How long have you been here?" he said. The question landed differently than she expected. Not "how long have you lived here?" which was the question polite visitors asked. Not "do you enjoy the country?" which was the question bored visitors asked. "How long have you been here?" The distinction was small and enormous at the same time. She set the book down on the bench. 7 years, she said. He looked at her. She did not look away. She had spent 7 years in a place where most of the people around her looked slightly past her, and she had forgotten, until this morning, what it felt like to be looked at directly by someone who was paying attention. 7 years, he said, very quietly, in the voice of someone noting a number that means more than the number. "Yes," she said. Another silence, longer this time. "Come to London," he said. She had not expected that. She had not expected any of this, but she especially had not expected that. It was not said the way people say "come to London" when they mean "wouldn't it be nice?" or "you really should visit sometime." It was said the way people say "come to London" when they have already decided something and are simply informing you of it. She laughed. It came out wrong, sharper than she meant. The honest kind of laugh that you do not produce when you are performing cheerfulness, but only when something has caught you genuinely off guard. "My family," she said, "has spent 7 years making sure no one in London knows I exist." He did not look shocked by this. He did not look sympathetic in the soft, uncomfortable way of people who have heard something they do not know what to do with. He looked at her the same way he had looked at her when he came around the garden wall, with that deliberate, assessing quality, the look of someone measuring the distance between what they were told and what is actually in front of them. "Why?" he said. It was a direct question, the most direct question anyone had asked her in years. Her family did not ask it, because they were the answer. The servants at Fernholt did not ask it, because they had not been employed here long enough to know things had ever been different. The rector did not ask it, because he had learned that some families had arrangements, and it was not his place to query them. Elara looked at the roses for a moment. The climbing ones on the left wall, the ones she had trained herself, the ones she had tied and cut and watered through 4 summers. My mother came from a family with money, and my father came from a family with title, she said. When they married, everyone agreed it was an excellent arrangement. The difficulty was that they also had 3 children, and the eldest son inherited the title, and the eldest daughter married very well at 19, and I was the third, the youngest. And by the time it was my turn to be presented to society, there were some questions about the family's finances that my father had not resolved. And my mother decided that introducing a 3rd child to London, at the moment when everyone was looking at the family's accounts, was, she paused, unwise. So they delayed it, he said. They delayed it, she said. And then they delayed it again, because the year after that, my brother had some difficulty that I was never told the details of, and it was better if the family was quiet that season. And then they delayed it a 3rd time because my sister's husband's family was having trouble, and it reflected on all of us. And by then I was 20, and then 21, and then 22, and the delays had become, she stopped again. The delays had become the arrangement. He was very still. And no one, he said, has asked whether you minded. My mother asked once, Elara said. When I was 17, I told her I minded very much. She told me it was only temporary. She believed it when she said it. I believe she still believes it, in the way people believe things that have been true for so long that examining them would be very uncomfortable. And you, he said, do you believe it is temporary? She looked at him steadily. No, she said. The words sat between them in the garden air, clean and final as a door closing. He was quiet for a long time after that, long enough for a bird to cross the garden overhead and disappear over the rose wall, long enough for the lavender to move once in a brief pass of wind and then go still again. Then come to London, he said again. You cannot simply say that, she said. You have been on my family's land for less than 2 hours. You do not know me. You cannot, she stopped. You cannot simply arrive 2 days early and decide to fix something you have only just learned is broken. I did not say I would fix it, he said. I said, come to London. Those are the same thing. They are not, he said, and there was something in his voice when he said it that was not argument and not certainty, but something in between, something that said he had thought about this, specifically, in the last several minutes, and had arrived at a position. If you come to London, he said, whatever comes after that is your own doing. I am not fixing anything. I am opening a door. She stared at him. He looked back with that clean, deliberate quality. There was nothing of the theatrical about him. He was not performing. She had spent enough years watching people perform at each other to know the difference. My parents, she said carefully, would not permit it. Your parents, he said, did an unfortunate piece of business with my father 12 years ago. I inherited the debt of that transaction along with everything else. I have just spent 40 minutes in your father's study writing off a portion of that debt in exchange for the drainage rights on the south parcel. He paused. I am also willing to write off the rest of it in exchange for a formal introduction to his daughter in London next season. Elara was very quiet. You are bribing my father, she said. I am negotiating, he said. There is a difference. Not a very significant one. No, he agreed. Not a very significant one. She looked at him for a long time. He let her look. He did not fidget or look away, or attempt to fill the silence with justification. He simply waited, the way she had learned to wait, with the patience of someone who had decided something and was giving it time to land. Why? She said finally. He looked at her. For the first time since he had come around the garden wall, she could not read his expression. Because you are the first person I have spoken to today, he said, who said something true. He left. She stayed in the east garden until the shadows moved into the afternoon, and the light went from gold to the flat, even brightness of midday. She picked up the pruning shears. She trimmed 3 branches off the climbing rose on the left wall that she had been meaning to trim for a week. She set the shears back down. She picked up the book. She put it down. She thought about the question he had asked, "How long have you been here?" and the specific way he had said 7 years after she had answered, quietly, to himself, like a man noting an entry in a record he was keeping. Her mother appeared at the terrace doors at 1:15. "He has gone," Lady Voss said. "Yes," Ilara said, "I know." Her mother came down the 3 steps from the terrace and crossed the south lawn and came through the arch at the top of the garden path. She did this very deliberately, which meant she had decided to have a conversation rather than simply making an observation through an open door. "He found you this morning," her mother said, "before I arrived." "He came around the wrong wall," Ilara said. "He was looking for the main house." "What did you speak about?" "Aqueducts," Ilara said. Her mother looked at her. Ilara's face was perfectly calm, which it was not required to be for this to be true. "He will forget you by Thursday," Lady Voss said. She said it gently, not cruelly, the way you say something you believe to be a kindness, a piece of realistic information that saves someone from a painful anticipation. She was looking at Ilara with something in her face that was, genuinely, a form of caring, the maternal kind that goes wrong not because it starts in the wrong place, but because it solves for the wrong variable. Ilara picked up the pruning shears. She looked at the climbing rose. She found another branch that needed attention, and she worked on it carefully, cutting at the correct angle, the way the old Fernholt gardener had taught her when she was 16 and had nowhere else to go. She did not answer. Her mother stood at the garden entrance for a moment longer. Then she went back through the arch and across the lawn and up the 3 terrace steps and through the door. The door closed behind her with the small click of a well-maintained house. Ilara trimmed the rose. She had learned, at 23, that her mother was often right about things. She was right that the roads from London were terrible after rain. She was right that the Fernholt kitchens made better bread than any baker in the nearest village. She was right about which of the local families were reliable and which ones were charming in a way that had nothing behind it. She was almost never right about the things that mattered. 3 days later, on Thursday, when the Duke was supposed to have arrived, a letter came instead. It was addressed to Lord Voss. Ilara was not told about it. She found out because the house had a quality of altered silence after the post came, the kind that meant something was being discussed in the study behind a closed door. She sat in the East Garden with the 3rd volume of the Aqueduct history, and she did not go inside until supper. At supper, her father was thoughtful, her mother was careful. These were distinct states. Her father being thoughtful meant he was working through the mathematics of something. Her mother being careful meant she was managing information. They talked about the weather. They talked about the church roof, which needed repair. They talked about the cost of things in general, in a conversation that circled the actual subject the way you circle a puddle you have decided not to step in. Ilara ate her supper. She did not ask about the letter. She found out 10 days later, not from her parents, but from the housekeeper, Mrs. Norris, who did not realize she was telling Ilara anything, by saying, while adjusting the vases in the front hall, that it was very good news about the Voss accounts, wasn't it? And wasn't it unusual for the Duke of Ashmore to be so generous about such things? Ilara was very still for a moment. Yes, she said. Very unusual. She went to the East Garden. She sat on the bench. She thought about the conversation by the rose wall, and the word negotiating, and the flat certainty in a voice that never needed to raise itself to be heard. She thought about the word door. Then she went inside, and she wrote a letter to her sister in London, which she had not done in 2 years, because the subject of London had become uncomfortable between them. She wrote carefully and at length. She asked how things were. She asked about the city. She asked, at the end of the letter, very simply, whether she would be welcome for a visit if arrangements could be made. She sealed the letter and gave it to the underfootman to post before she could change her mind. Her sister's reply came in 9 days. It was warm and long and full of exclamation marks, which was how her sister wrote everything. It said, yes, of course, yes, please come, how wonderful, why haven't you written? The children would love to see you, please come as soon as you can. It also said, in a postscript added at the bottom in slightly different ink, as though the information had arrived after the letter was written, that she had seen the Duke of Ashmore at a dinner party the previous week. She said it very casually. She said he had asked after the family. She said he had seemed very well. Ilara read the postscript twice. Then she folded the letter and put it in the drawer of her writing desk, in the section she had assigned to things that required careful thought. The conversation with her parents happened on a Tuesday. Ilara asked for it directly, which was not something she had done in years, and which meant they understood before she had said a word that something had changed. She did not perform the conversation. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything she did carefully, by thinking about it for a long time beforehand, identifying the pieces of it that she could not control and the pieces she could, and deciding that she was going to say what she meant rather than what would be most comfortable to say. She sat in her father's study, in the chair across from his desk. Her mother was in the chair beside the window. The afternoon light came through the glass at a low angle and made everything look quiet and old. "I would like to go to London," Ilara said. The silence that followed was of the specific quality produced by a thing that everyone in a room has been thinking about, and no one has said aloud. "Ilara," her mother began. "I am 23 years old," Ilara said. "I have lived at Fernholt for 7 years. I have read every book in the library. I am not unwell. I have never been unwell. The reasons I was kept here have changed several times without any of them being communicated to me, and the reasons I have been given on the occasions I have asked have been—" She paused, choosing this word with care— incomplete. Her father looked at his hands. "I know about the letter from the Duke," she said. "I know about the arrangement." Her mother looked at her father. Her father looked at the window. "The nature of that arrangement," Ilara continued, "is between you and him, but the existence of it tells me that something has changed, and I am asking you, directly, to tell me what is going to happen, and to let me have some part in deciding it." There was a long silence. Her father said, "It is not as simple as—" "I know it is not simple," Ilara said. "I have had 7 years to think about how complicated it is. I am asking you to have this conversation with me anyway." It was the longest conversation she had had with both of her parents together in 3 years. It was not entirely comfortable. It did not resolve everything. There were things said on all sides that were not quite right, and things not said that probably should have been. Her father had, at one point, said something about the difficulty of the financial situation, in a way that made it sound as though the situation had simply happened to them all equally, as weather happens, and Ilara had looked at him and said, very quietly, that she understood the situation had been difficult, but that it had been considerably more difficult for her than for anyone else in the room, and that she was asking him to acknowledge that. He had been silent for a long time. Then he had said that she was right, and he was sorry, and she had believed him, because her father was many things, but he was not a man who apologized for things he did not mean. Her mother had said, at a different point, that everything had been done with Ilara's best interests at heart. Ilara had said that she believed that, and that it had not been enough, and that she was not saying this to cause pain, but because it was true, and the truth of it seemed like something that should be said between people who were going to continue having a relationship. Her mother had looked at the window for a moment, then she had looked back at Ilara, and said that she understood. It was the most her mother had conceded in 7 years, and it was given without ceremony, without defense, in a voice that was not entirely steady. That was the thing she held on to afterward. It was a real conversation, with her actual parents, about her actual life, and they had all been present for it. At the end of it, her father said that arrangements could be made. At the end of it, her mother said she would write to Ilara's sister. At the end of it, Ilara went to the east garden and sat on the bench in the last of the afternoon light and looked at the climbing rose on the left wall, the one she had trained herself from almost nothing over 4 years, and she felt something she did not immediately have a name for. It was not happiness quite. It was more specific than that. It was the feeling of having been in a room with a locked door for a very long time and then saying out loud, in a clear voice, that the door was locked, and being heard. She picked up the pruning shears. She trimmed a branch. She put them down. She let herself sit quietly for a while. The preparations for London took 6 weeks, which was faster than Ilara had expected, and slower than she had hoped. But it was a real number of weeks moving toward a real thing, and that was different from all the years of delay. Her mother threw herself into the arrangements with the focused energy of someone rediscovering a task she had originally enjoyed. There were dresses to be made, because most of Ilara's had been made for country life and were not appropriate for London. There were calls to be paid to neighbors she had not seen in years, so that she could be reintroduced into the county's social fabric before she was introduced into the city's. There were letters to be written and schedules to be arranged. Ilara participated in all of it. She did not resist the dresses, though she had opinions about them. She made the calls with her mother and was polite and present in a way she had not been required to be for a long time, which felt like a muscle she had to warm up carefully before trusting it with real weight. She wrote one more letter during those 6 weeks. She drafted it 3 times. The first draft was too formal, which was not like her, but was like the version of herself that had learned to perform formality as protection. She set it aside. The second draft was too informal. It had the quality of someone overcompensating, swinging deliberately in the other direction, and she read it back and felt that the thing she was trying to say was getting lost in the manner of saying it. She set that aside too. The third draft was short, which was right, and direct, which was also right, and left enough unsaid that the space between the words did some work. She was not entirely sure why she wrote it. She was going to London, and it was possible she would encounter him there, and the situation could be addressed in person, in the ordinary way. Writing to him was not necessary. She was clear on this. She wrote the letter anyway. It was short. It said, "I am coming to London. I wanted to tell you, since the arrangement was partly yours to make. I do not know exactly what I expect to happen. I thought you ought to know that I am not someone who comes to London to be placed somewhere convenient. I come with my own intentions, which I have not entirely worked out yet, but which are mine." She reread it twice. She sent it. She did not know what she expected in return. A polite acknowledgement, perhaps. A brief note saying he was pleased to hear it. Something professional and contained. What came back was 3 sentences on a single sheet of very good paper, in handwriting that was exactly as precise as his voice. The sentences were, "I expected nothing less. I will look forward to your inconvenient intentions. The door is open." She folded it. She put it in the drawer with her sister's letter. She went back to packing. She did not have very much to pack, which was an observation she made without self-pity and without drama. 7 years in one place with limited access to the shops and no social season meant a wardrobe suited entirely to country living, a great deal of which was not going to be appropriate for London and would be left behind. She kept the gray dress she wore on Tuesdays because she liked it. She kept the books she had bought with her own money, which were 2, one being a volume on soil composition that she had ordered through the local bookseller, and one being a collection of essays about the nature of habit that she had found in the market and purchased on instinct. Everything else in the library was Fernholt's, and she left it there without feeling she was leaving something of herself, because herself was not in the books, but in what she had made of reading them. She packed the letter in the drawer of the portable writing desk she was taking, not the 3 sentences specifically. All 3 letters, her sister's, the Duke's, and a short note from the old gardener Hobbs, who had been retired 2 years ago to his daughter's house in the village, and who had sent her a note when he heard she was leaving, saying only that he hoped she would find a garden as good as the one she was leaving behind, and that whoever took over the roses had better know what they were doing, because the east wall was in a delicate state and needed someone who understood it. She had written back and told him the east wall was in excellent shape, and whoever took it over would be lucky to have it, and she intended to plant something even better at her next address. She had meant it when she wrote it. She meant it more, standing in the new east garden at Ashmore, with the pruning shears in her hand, and the morning light doing exactly what morning light does in the east, which is arrive with total confidence and illuminate everything it touches without asking permission. She went back to packing the rest of what needed packing, and then she was done. London in the early spring was nothing like she had expected it to be, and it was exactly like she had expected it to be, and neither of these things cancelled the other out. She had read about London in enough books to have built a version of it in her mind over 7 years, and the real city sat over her imagined city like a transparency on a map, overlapping in some places, wildly divergent in others, occasionally so precisely what she had pictured that it startled her. The noise was the first thing, not the volume of it, though the volume was substantial, but the quality, layered and continuous, the particular texture of a city that never fully went quiet, even at 4 in the morning, when she had lain awake in her sister's spare room listening to it. Wheels on stone, voices at irregular intervals. Somewhere, always, something being moved from one place to another. She had spent so long in the deep quiet of Fernholt that the noise of London should have been overwhelming. Instead, she found herself listening to it the way she listened to the birds in the east garden, with the pleasure of a sound that told her she was in a living place. The scale was the second thing. She had known London was large. She had read the figures, the number of streets and parishes, and the population estimates. She had not been able to convert those figures into the felt sense of what it meant to stand at the end of a street and not be able to see the end of it, to walk for 20 minutes in one direction and still be inside the city, to look from an upstairs window and see rooftops running to the horizon. 7 years in the proportions of Fernholt had calibrated her sense of space to the dimensions of the house, the grounds, the small village 3 miles away. London reset everything. She found she did not mind the reset. It felt like standing up after a very long time sitting down. Her sister's house was in Mayfair, which was exactly what her sister's house should have been. Her sister being the kind of woman who had always found her way to exactly the right place at exactly the right time, in a way that looked effortless and was not. There were 3 children, aged 2, 4, and 7, who regarded Alara with the comprehensive, unedited curiosity of people who had not yet learned to pretend they were not interested in something. The 7-year-old asked her where she had been, and she said she had been in the country. The 7-year-old said that was boring. She said yes, sometimes. The 7-year-old said she could come to his school play, which was on Friday. She said she would try. She went. It was about a dog and a missing hat. It was extremely difficult to follow. She enjoyed it very much. The first social event was a dinner at a house in Belgravia that belonged to friends of her sister's brother-in-law, which made it a comfortable 3 degrees removed from anything that required her to be interesting. She could be present and polite and asking questions about other people and saying little about herself, which was a skill she had in abundance from 7 years of practice. She was introduced to 11 people at this dinner. She remembered all their names and most of what they told her, because she had spent 7 years with only books for company and had developed a habit of paying very close attention to everything. 3 of the 11 people were interesting. One of them, a woman named Lady Caldwell, was so interesting that Alara spent 40 minutes talking to her about water rights in the north, which Lady Caldwell was involved in through a property dispute, and which Alara could contribute to from her extensive knowledge of Roman drainage systems. Lady Caldwell looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has encountered something they did not expect to encounter at a dinner party in Belgravia. "Where have you been?" Lady Caldwell said. "The country," Alara said. "Well," Lady Caldwell said, "we need more of you in the city." He was not at the dinner in Belgravia. He was at the second event, which was a small gathering at a house in Grosvenor Square 3 days later. She knew he was in the room before she saw him, not because she sensed him in any dramatic fashion, but because the quality of the social noise shifted very slightly, the way it shifts when a room recalibrates around something. She heard a cluster of people near the windows reset their conversation in the specific way that means someone new and significant has entered. She was talking to a retired admiral about the engineering challenges of harbors when she saw him. He was across the room. He was, as before, tall and dark-coated and giving the impression of a man who was paying closer attention than he appeared to be. He was talking to 2 other men. He was not looking at her. Then he was looking at her. It was brief, a second, perhaps 2, a look that said, "I see you, and I knew you were here, and I am not going to perform being surprised." Then he returned his attention to the 2 men and the conversation, which from the visible gestures appeared to be about horses or property, or some other thing that required pointing at things not in the room. The admiral said something about tidal patterns. "I'm sorry," Alara said. "You were saying about the channel?" She made herself return to the admiral. She talked about harbors for another 7 minutes. She was entirely present for the first 4 of them. They spoke for the first time that evening at the edge of the main drawing room, where the crowd had thinned around a table of books that had been put out for people to look at. She was looking at them. He arrived beside her. "Roman aqueducts?" he said, looking at the table. "Geography," she said. "I have moved on. How are you finding it? She knew he did not mean geography. Larger than I pictured, she said. Louder. More interesting. The people are, she considered. The people here say a great deal, while meaning very little, and occasionally say very little, while meaning a great deal. I am still working out which is which. That is a London skill that takes years, he said. I have been here 11 days, she said. I expect I will manage it faster. She felt him look at her sideways. You said your intentions were your own, he said. What are they? She thought about this with genuine seriousness, the way she thought about everything that seemed worth thinking about properly. I would like to be known, she said, not as someone's daughter or someone's cousin or someone's charity case, as myself. I am 23 years old, and I have read almost everything in print about ancient engineering. And I have an opinion about nearly every topic I have encountered. And I would like to be in a place where having those opinions matters to someone. They matter to me, he said. He said it very simply, not performatively, the way you say something that is true and therefore does not need decoration. She was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. That is why I wrote to you. Something moved through his expression. She was watching him carefully enough now to catch it. Ilara, he said. It was the first time he had said her name. She had given it to him at the edge of the garden that first morning, when her mother had made the introduction that omitted it, and he had asked around her, directly, and she had said it herself. She had not thought about the fact that he had filed it away until now, when he used it in the careful, precise way of someone who has been waiting for the right moment. Yes, she said. I would like to call on you, he said, properly, with your sister's permission. She looked at him steadily. I will tell her to expect you, she said. The calling visit was on a Thursday, which she thought was appropriate. He arrived exactly on time, not a minute early, which told her something different about him than the morning he had appeared on Tuesday. When he chose to be where he was deliberate about it. Her sister's sitting room was green and comfortable, and had one of the children's drawings pinned improbably above the fireplace, which gave the whole room a quality of cheerful disorder that she thought her sister had not considered in relation to formal calling visits. It was also, she thought, entirely correct. This was not a room for performing. Neither was she. They talked for an hour. Her sister was present, as was proper, and added things to the conversation at intervals with the cheerful, interested participation of someone who was genuinely glad to see both people in the room, and thought the situation was, in general, very good. By the end of the hour, Ilara had talked about aqueducts again, because it came up naturally, and he had told her something about the Ashmore Estate's drainage challenges, and her sister had told them both something about the state of the roads between London and Oxford, and it had been the most ordinary and the least ordinary conversation Ilara had had in a very long time. When he left, her sister sat across from her in the green sitting room and held her teacup with the thoughtful focus of someone making a calculation she was not going to share unless asked. He listens to you, her sister said. Yes, Ilara said. That is rarer than it should be, her sister said. I know, Ilara said. Her sister said nothing more. She refilled the teacup. She looked at the child's drawing above the fireplace with an expression that was half fondness and half resignation, as all feelings about children's drawings are. The season moved forward the way seasons do, with the particular combination of urgency and monotony that makes them feel both slow and fast in retrospect. There were events, and there were calls, and there were dinners, and there were mornings in her sister's house, where the children made breakfast a project of impressive complexity for something that was essentially bread and eggs. Ilara moved through all of it, with the patient attention she brought to everything. She built a picture of London the way she had built the garden at Fernholt, carefully, piece by piece, with her own hands, in the time available to her. She did not try to rush it. She had learned that things forced in 7 years of quiet had a way of coming apart. She met Lady Caldwell twice more, and they established something that felt like the beginning of a friendship, which surprised Ilara and should not have. Because Lady Caldwell was the kind of woman who recognized a thing clearly and then moved toward it without apology. She met the Admiral again at a different gathering, and they finished the conversation about tidal engineering. She met a woman named Mrs. Park who was a poet and did not announce this about herself unless asked, and who looked at the world in a way that Ilara recognized because she had developed a similar look over 7 years of having a great deal of time to observe and very little to perform. And she saw him, regularly, with increasing frequency, in the way of two people who are in the same city and both accept that they would like to be in the same room. The second, calling visit. A walk in the park with her sister as chaperone, which her sister performed with such agreeable good humor that it barely felt like chaperoning at all. Another dinner, a smaller one, where they were seated near each other by an arrangement that she did not think was accidental, and that he did not suggest he was surprised by. He talked to her the way he had in the garden, with complete attention, without managing her or smoothing over the difficult parts. When she said things he disagreed with, he said so, clearly and without heat, and expected her to respond in kind, which she did. When she said something he had not considered before, he was quiet for a moment, and she could see him actually revising something, and then he said so. She had not known how much she had wanted to be disagreed with, properly, until she experienced it. There was an afternoon in May when they were walking in a smaller park, a quieter one than the main fashionable paths, and her sister had found a bench she wanted to sit on to look at the water, and Ilara and the Duke had walked a little ahead along the path, which was entirely proper because they were still in full view of her sister's bench. "Your father wrote to me," he said. She looked at him. "About what?" "About this," he said. "In general." She thought about this for a moment. "What did he say?" "He said he hoped my intentions were honorable," the Duke said. His tone was perfectly even, but she had learned by now to read what was underneath it, and underneath it was a very dry appreciation of the situation. "And are they?" she said. He looked at her with that deliberate quality she had catalogued from the first morning. "I intend," he said, "to ask you a question. I want to ask it properly, which means I need to know the answer will be yours, and not your family's." She stopped walking. "It will be mine," she said. "Everything I have said to you has been mine. I have not said a single thing in the last 3 months that I did not mean. Ask your question." He stopped. He turned to face her, fully, the way he looked at everything he was paying attention to. "I would like to marry you," he said. "Not because of the arrangement with your father, not because of what I said about doors, because I have spent the last 3 months talking to you, and I have not once had to translate what you said into what you actually meant. I have not once had to manage my response to a thing you told me. You say what you think. You listen when I say what I think. That is." He paused, and for a moment she could see him searching for the word, which was unusual for a man who was normally very efficient with language. "That is, not nothing," he said. "That is, in fact, the whole thing." Ilara looked at him. She thought about the East Garden and the 7 years and the book about aqueducts. She thought about the question, "How long have you been here?" and the way he had said, 7 years, back to himself quietly. The way you repeat a fact that you are going to do something with. She thought about the letter with 3 sentences, and the words, "The door is open," and the way she had packed her belongings 6 weeks later and left the East Garden behind, without looking back, because she had known, without knowing exactly how she knew, that she was not leaving it, because she was done with it, but because she was ready for something else. She thought about what it meant to be known. She thought about all the times in 7 years when she had said something in a room and the room had continued around her, the way a river continues around a stone. Not noticing, not stopping, not registering that the stone had said something worth listening to. She thought about how she had learned, gradually and without deciding to say fewer things, and then fewer things still, until most of what she thought lived only in the books she read, and the garden she kept, and the careful internal conversation she had with herself every morning over tea. She thought about a voice saying, "You are the first person I have spoken to today who said something true." "Yes," she said. She said it clearly, the way she said everything she meant. He looked at her. Something in his face that she had never seen before. Something that was, for the first time, not composed or deliberate, but simply there. The way things are when you have stopped managing them and are just having them. "Thank you," he said. "You do not need to thank me," she said. "I am doing this because I want to." "I know," he said. "That is why I'm thanking you." Her sister, from the bench by the water, was looking at the birds with a concentration that suggested she was being extremely tactful. The engagement was announced at the end of May. It produced the particular London social effect of a thing that everyone looks back on and says, of course, in retrospect, how obvious, while simultaneously being completely impossible to have predicted when it was happening. Lady Caldwell, who had known both of them separately and had been watching developments with the alert intelligence she brought to everything she observed, sent a note to Elara that said simply, "Well done." The Admiral sent a very correct congratulatory letter. Mrs. Park, the poet, sent a poem, which was 7 lines long and about doors, and which was the most accurate thing anyone sent her during those weeks. She read it 3 times and put it in the drawer with the other letters she kept. The social machinery of London took the information and processed it at its usual speed, which was fast and thorough, and occasionally inaccurate in the specific way of things told and retold. She heard a version of her own story at a gathering in the 3rd week of June, told by a woman who did not know she was in the room, a version that had several of the facts approximately right and the emotional content completely wrong, in the way that stories about quiet people always got the emotion wrong because quiet people had not been performing their feelings for an audience. She did not correct the woman. She listened to the story and noted where it diverged and felt, with a kind of clear-eyed equanimity she had not expected, that the story being wrong did not change what had actually happened. What had actually happened was hers. It did not require an accurate public version to remain true. Her mother came to London. The visit was, in the way of visits between Elara and her mother, a conversation that contained many things that were said and many things that were not. Her mother looked around her sister's house and at Elara in it, and at the particular quality of Elara in London, which was not the same as the quality of Elara in Fernholt, or rather, it was the same thing with more room around it. And her expression was complicated in the way of a person confronting the gap between what they had planned and what actually happened. She had dressed carefully for London. Elara's mother. She wore a traveling dress in deep blue that she had owned for many years but kept in excellent condition. The way she kept everything, through disciplined attention and refusal to let things deteriorate past the point of rescue. Her hair was arranged as severely as always. Her back was perfectly straight. These things, which had once read to Alara as a kind of armor, now simply read as her mother. The specific set of choices a person makes when they have decided to present themselves a certain way to the world, and have held that decision for so long, it is no longer distinguishable from who they actually are. Alara looked at her and felt something that had no neat name. Not forgiveness, which suggested a ledger, a clearing of accounts, a restoration of a state that had existed before. Not distance, because she was not distant from her mother. She was entirely present with her, seeing her with clear eyes. Something else. Something that was the feeling of looking at a complicated thing and understanding it, even if you did not agree with all of it, and continuing forward regardless. "You seem well," her mother said. "I am well," Alara said. "London agrees with you." "I agree with London," Alara said. "I think that is the more important direction." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am sorry." She said it simply, without ceremony. "For the years, I am sorry for how it was managed. It was not everything. It was not all the years or all the empty Tuesdays or all the books read on the stone bench in the East Garden, because there was nowhere else to put herself. It was not the birthday no one had remembered, or the countless small moments of being positioned around, or the particular quality of being a secret kept from a world she had wanted to be part of. It was not everything, but it was real, and it was said directly, and her mother meant it, and Alara had learned the difference. "I know," she said. "Thank you for saying so." They had tea. They talked about the wedding arrangements, which were practical and numerous. They talked about the children's drawings above the fireplace. They talked, carefully, and then less carefully, about the things that had happened between them, and the things that should have happened differently, and what came next. It was the beginning of a different kind of conversation, not resolved, not clean, but real, in the way of things that have been examined rather than arranged. On a morning in June, which was sunny and impractical for working outdoors, Alara walked through the Ashmore estate for the first time. The estate was very large. She had known this from the drainage documents and the business her father had conducted with it for 20 years. But knowing a thing from documents and walking through it were different kinds of knowing. It had old gardens that had been somewhat neglected, and a kitchen garden that was very well kept, and an east-facing section of the grounds that got the morning light in the particular way she recognized from 7 years of experience. The estate had the quality of a place that had been maintained by people who understood maintenance as a duty rather than a pleasure, which meant it was structurally sound and aesthetically somewhat tired in specific places. The formal gardens near the south front, where the hedges were trimmed but had not been rethought in probably 30 years, and the long walk between the two ornamental walls, where the planting had been done by someone who understood plants as objects rather than as growing things, and had placed them in patterns that looked correct in autumn when they were drawn on paper and ordinary in spring when they were actually growing. She said some of this as they walked. She did not say it as a criticism. She said it because she was thinking it, and she had been somewhere for 3 months, where thinking things out loud was not merely permitted but expected. He listened. He said, "My mother arranged most of the gardens. She died when I was 15. After that, the head gardener maintained what was there. She was quiet for a moment. Then it has been maintained out of respect," she said. "That is a good reason. But it can be both. respect for what it was, and permission to let it be something new. He looked at her. "You are already planning it," he said. "I have been planning it," she said, "since you told me about the drainage challenges." The south-facing wall near the ha-ha gets the right exposure for something that would do much better than what is there currently. What would do better? "I have thoughts," she said. "I will know more when I have spent a season with the soil." He smiled. It was not the first time she had seen him smile, but each time had the quality of something slightly unexpected. Not because it was rare, but because when it appeared, it was completely real, the way things are real when they have not been practiced. He walked beside her, pointing out things, explaining history, answering questions she asked. He answered them the way he always did, completely, without managing what she was allowed to know. She stopped at the edge of the east-facing garden. The light was doing the gold, low thing it did in mornings. There was a stone bench near the wall. The wall had climbing plants on it that had not been properly trained and were growing in the ambitious, unsupervised way of plants left to themselves for too long. "This needs attention," she said. "It has needed it for several years," he said. "I am not skilled at roses." "I am," she said. "I trained the ones at Fernholt. 4 years." He looked at the wall. He looked at her. "Then it is yours," he said, "if you want it." She stood at the edge of the garden and looked at the climbing plants on the wall and thought about all the things that came with the word yours. Not the stone bench or the iron fence or the lavender she might plant from seeds, but the life that surrounded them. The size of it, the realness of it. "I want it," she said. She walked into the garden. She looked at the rose canes, the ones that had gone too long without a trained hand, and she thought about the angles, the cuts that would be needed, the patience it would take to bring them back to what they could be. She had been good at patience for a long time. She had learned it in the wrong place, for the wrong reasons. She had learned it in a room where it was the only available tool, and she had made it into something more than survival, something she actually believed in. The idea that slow and careful was its own kind of power, that the thing you tended daily with attention grew into the thing you relied on. She was going to use that now in the right place, for reasons she had chosen herself. He stood at the garden's edge and watched her assess the roses with the same look she had worn in her sister's sitting room, and at the dinner in Belgravia, and in every conversation they had ever had. Completely present, making up her mind, not performing it. "Pruning shears," she said. "Somewhere on the estate there must be a decent pair." "I will find them," he said. She looked at him over her shoulder. There was nothing dramatic in the look, nothing that required description in terms of electricity or revelation. It was the look of someone settling into something, into a place, into a morning, into the specific kind of life that starts when you stop letting other people decide where the walls go. 2 days early," she said. He looked at her. "The morning you arrived," she said, "you were 2 days early. Everything started there." He was quiet for a moment. "Would you prefer I had come on Thursday?" he said. She turned back to the roses. "No," she said. "I would not." She stood in the morning light in a garden that needed her attention and would take a patient season to come right. And she felt, with the settled certainty of someone who has found the correct word after a very long search, that she was where she was supposed to be. Not because anyone had placed her there, not because the arrangement had worked out, not because the door had been opened from outside, because she had walked through it herself, because she had looked at 7 years of standing still and decided, with the pruning shears still in her hand and the climbing roses watching from the wall. That stillness was only worth something when you chose it, and she was done choosing it. And because there was a man at the edge of the garden who had asked her how long she had been somewhere, and then said the number back to himself quietly, like something he intended to remember, and she had known from that moment, even if she had not been ready to name it, that the sort of person who asks that question and means it is the sort of person you go to find the pruning shears for. The roses would take a season. She had learned how to be patient with seasons. She had also learned, and this was the newer lesson, the one she was still practicing, how to tell the difference between patience as a tool you use and patience as an excuse you give yourself. She had used it both ways over 7 years. In the beginning, it had been a tool. I am being patient because this situation is what it is, and I am making the best of it, and there is no alternative, and forcing the issue will make things worse. In the middle, it had become an excuse. I am being patient because patience is a virtue, and I am a person of virtue, and this is how things are. At the end, at the very end, in the last months at Fernholt, when the Duke had come around the wall and asked his question, it had become something different entirely. Not a tool and not an excuse. A habit she was looking at clearly and deciding to put down. She had put it down. The pruning shears in her hand were not patience. They were intention. The same motion, the same careful attention to angle and growth and what a plant needed, rather than what was convenient. But underneath it, a completely different quality of choosing. She was not working in this garden because it was all that was available to her. She was working in it because she had chosen it, specifically, with full knowledge of other available options. That was the thing nobody tells you about the difference between a life you fall into and a life you build. From the outside, they can look entirely similar. A woman in a garden with pruning shears looks the same whether she is hiding or whether she is home. The difference is entirely internal. It is the knowledge of having decided. She knew. He came back around the east wall with a pair of good shears he had found in the old tool room near the kitchen garden. He handed them to her. She took them, tried the weight, adjusted her grip. "Better than the ones at Fernholt," she said. "I will tell the groundskeeper," he said. She looked at the cane she had been planning to start with. She made the cut at the correct angle, clean, the way Hobbs had taught her. The cut rows immediately looked more intentional. That was always how it went. One good cut showed you what the rest of them should be. He did not leave. He leaned against the garden wall and was quiet in the easy way of someone who did not need to fill silences, which was one of the things she had established in the first week of knowing him, and had since confirmed many times. He watched her work the way you watch someone doing something they are genuinely good at, with uncomplicated interest, no performance of being interested. "Do you know," she said, not stopping her work, "what the Roman engineers called the gradient calculation for a water channel? The measurement they took to determine which way the water would flow." "I do not," he said. "The Libra Aquaria," she said. "The water balance. They would fill a container and watch which way the surface tilted, and that told them which direction was downhill, even when the landscape was too gradual for the human eye to detect a slope." She made another cut. "I spent a week thinking about that when I was 21. The idea that the truth of which way a thing tilts can be completely invisible to ordinary looking. But there is always a way to find it if you use the right instrument." He was quiet. "And have you found it?" he said. "The right instrument." She considered the rose wall for a moment. She found the next cane that needed attention. "I think," she said, "that I am standing in it." The roses would take a season. She had learned how to be patient with seasons. She picked up a cane and looked at where the cut should go, and she began.